Hi, this is Kathy Karras coming to you from my studio, my home studio. So today I'm painting this Australian scene, and I just wanted to show you a few tips on how I go about doing something like this. So I have already drawn up the scene, and you can see there's not very much detail at all. I've just drawn a little shack, outline of a shack, and a horizon line. So the rest is done in paint, and just let me show you how I go about it. First of all, dipping into water with my big brush and into French ultramarine blue, creating a bit of a, just getting a bit of a watery mix of French ultramarine blue, and I don't want it too strong in pigment, a tiny touch of alizarin just to dull it back a little bit. Okay, now straight into paint, and it's fairly pale. And straight down to the horizon line. So the paper is pretty well just tinted. I want a fairly pale wash. So this is on dry paper. I haven't wet it first. And straight into that now, I'm going into some yellow ochre with some water. These are my first washes. And I'm doing those background hills in a wash. Working into the wet paint. I'm just shaping the top of the hills with my brush, so it can be any shape that you like. Okay, just bring that down a little way. You can bring that up as high or as low as you wish. Make it a little bit more defined. And just bring that wash down around the building. Just a yellow ochre wash. And just down to that horizon line there. Okay, so a little bit more definition now. Switching brushes to a smaller brush, and a mix that's a little on the blue side, a little touch of red gold just to make it a little slightly green, so it's in the distance. And I'm just working into the distant hills, and these are the trees that are dotted on top of the hill, and I'm working still on wet paper, but I want to create a soft edge. I don't want a hard edge on top of the hills, because that will push it into the distance and not be so close. It's all a bit soft at the moment. These are the first washes. I can bring some little trees down the hills a little bit. Just create that with the tip of my brush. It's a smaller brush I've changed to now. Okay, so moving on, I'll be adding to that blue a little bit more gold, and making a little bit more, just a touch brighter green. And I'm starting to. I need to put this board down. It's too high for me. It's running too much. Okay, so you just adjust everything and off you go. Yes, a little bit more pigment in the paint. Slightly green now. Okay, so here we go. A little bluer. Just some trees that are a little bit brighter. Now, it's important that you work into this while the paint's still a little wet, while the background's still wet, I mean. Coming forward a little bit brighter again. Less water and more paint. Just bringing in some of those trees. Okay. Now, a little stronger. Just getting a little bit more paint. So a little stronger in the mix now, the greens. And I'll start to bring in some of those tones behind the building. Now, these are trees in behind the building. Now, by putting in darker tones there, I can make the building stand out, and I can shape the building. So trees behind the subject are quite good because it just gives a bit of definition. I'm just shaping it with the point of my brush, and when I want a larger area covered, I use my brush to do that on the side. So I want to make just some trees in the distance there behind that building. I can shape that roof of that building just like that. So it's all still fairly wet. I'm coming in now along that ridge there. It's the horizon line. I've got a fairly good puddle of paint mixed, so I'm not running out of paint halfway through. This is quite the quicker version from what I did in class the other day. Need to do that when you're videoing what you're doing. Okay, so a little more blue just dropped in. Maybe a touch of red into that blue will give us a nice dark in some areas. The undergrowth could be a little darker in there. I'm working into around the building. Okay. Some trees up here. So now I can just work back into this background as the paper's drying. I can get a little bit more definition happening. Now, if I get too much definition, I can just hit it with a bit of water and it'll soften it back again. Yeah, so this is pretty much a wet in wet painting at the moment. Okay, so what I can do now is start to work on that building with a yellow ochre wash. I'm just going to leave a light next to, there's quite a big puddle of paint there. And I don't want to touch it because I don't want all of that green paint coming into my building. And that can just be a light on the side there. And I'll give this a bit of a wash over here as well. I'll give the buildings a wash except for the roof. And just touch there, it'll be okay. So this is just a wash anyway, so that'll be fine. Just bring a little bit of colour into that hill there. Don't quite want those foreground hills to be quite as pale as the background. Still leaving some lights above those bushes and trees here. Okay, so moving on. I can go onto the foreground. I can't do the tree that I want to do in this to the side here yet, because the paint is still too wet and I need a totally dry paper to do that. So I'll just work on the foreground with some yellow ochre, and this is on dry paper, so I can just skim across and have some lights of the paper coming through. So you always want to leave a little bit of white in your painting somewhere. You don't want to cover totally all of the paper. So I'll just strengthen that up a little bit with some of the green mix that I've got in my palette. And I'll just start to bring in a little bit more pigment, a bit more colour. I'm leaving a light, you'll notice here, light white of the paper, just along that ridge there. Bringing more colour here. I need a bit of a stronger tone. So by adding a bit of red gold or similar, I can just bring in a stronger colour here. Brings it right into the foreground when you do that. So there we go. Just letting that paint work for me. Right. Okay. So that's what I would call my first washes. It's a very quick wet in wet wash, this painting. I might just fix that up a little. Okay, so I need that to dry now before I can go any further. Okay, now time to finish off the painting, and it's just a matter of bringing in more tone and just depth of colour. So it's still looking a bit wishy-washy, so it needs a bit more work done on it. Yeah, so there's a dark tone just in here, in the building here, and I've just mixed up a really dark colour with three colours, which is the blue, a red and a yellow, just to get a dark tone in here. I'm just using those same colours that I've used in the painting in the rest of it, and use them to mix up a dark tone. So it just means too that it has less water in the brush. So there's a dark bit there, and there's a couple of doors in here in the little sheds on the side here. One there. Great thing about painting old sheds, it doesn't really matter if everything's straight or not. Quite often falling down. Okay. So we've got a couple of fences through here. We can just bring some of that dark tone that we're using through to just create the fences there. Let's make those fences. Okay, so I'll just a little bit more water in the brush in that same colour, And I can just bring in some shade there. It's a bit of a shade through there and there. Okay, so everything's starting to take shape now. As soon as you start to put in those tones, that's what happens. Just put a little bit of blue underneath the roof line there. Just so there'll always be a bit of a shadow under the roof line, and just connect that up a little bit. Okay, so might have a little bit of shade on this side. I've just weakened that with a little bit of water, and I'll let that run down into the building. Just let that pigment run down. It's a much better look if it's soft. So if ever you've got too much paint on your painting and you want to get some out of it, you can just dry your brush on a towel. If the paint's still wet, you can come back in and just lift out with your brush just like that, and get back to the original first layers of paint that you put down there. Okay, so I'll leave this side of the roof line the white of the paper, but I'll just bring in a little bit of something that looks like corrugates in the roof. Okay, and the same on this little roof here, little building. I'll put a little bit of shadow into that side as well. Okay, I'll just darken up here a little bit more. Doesn't really matter, you can go a little crazy with the brush, it's alright. Okay, now there's a little bit of rust on the roof, so I'll just mix in some red and red gold, which is actually yellow, but it makes a nice rusty colour. So I'll just put a little bit of rust on this little building here. Might have a little bit on here too. Okay, so now I'm just going to work on this area here. I need a fence line. The fence line comes in below the horizon line. So what I'm going to be doing there is with some of that red gold, I'll just skim a few, bring in a little bit of grasses through here. Maybe pick up a rougher brush and just give it a good look like grass is coming through there. So it's a little brighter tone. So it's by having a brighter tone in the foreground, it's really bringing it to the foreground, and also what happens at the same time is the rest of it gets pushed back into the distance. Okay, still leaving a bit of white along that horizon line there. I might want to just bring in a little bit of depth. Everything has a darker tone under it. So bring that in now. Just while that little puddle of paint is still wet and it can just blend nicely for me. Okay. Now just moving on to the posts, the fence posts. Just mixing, just finding in my dish here, and actually there's a bit of neutral tint there. I could use that, but I don't want to use it straight, it'll be too much. I'll mix it with whatever else I've been using. And I'll start with some posts here. Now don't do them like soldiers, so some are laying over, some are straight, some are laying over a little bit. And I'll bring them to the foreground as it comes towards the building. So as it comes towards the building, I'll make those a little bit bigger. And I don't mind if it blends down into the grassed area, that's fine. So as they come forward, I'm just going to make them a little bit bigger and fatter, because it's going to come forward old posts. Some can be leaning over, there could be a piece just leaning over here. So you can see they're a little larger as they come forward, giving you the just the illusion of distance. And I'll just, rather than put a line straight through for the wire, just in little areas, just randomly do that. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is, my background trees are nice and dry now, so all of this background here, totally dry, and you wouldn't attempt the next step unless it was. So I'm mixing up quite a dark mix, which is a lot of pigment, with 3 colours, red, yellow, blue. And I'm going to put in the tree trunk about here, and I don't really want it to be totally straight. I'll bring it up and just make some branches that way. Bring it right up into the sky, this one. Okay. Just going to soften the bottom of that tree, anchor it down a little, just like that. Just fix the trunk a little. Okay. So I'll just get a brush. Sometimes a fan brush is good, but I've just got this this Hake brush, drying it out nicely, drying out quite a bit. Okay, so into a bit of blue, and I'm just going to make the tree now, the branches, the leaves, sorry, on the tree, and you see it's just fairly, it's a little too blue. Just put in with some, I've got a bit of green, mossy green in here, I'll just mix it in with that. Okay, that's better. Dulled down a little bit. Yeah, so just this is what I do. I tend to make like just a puddle of paint, and it's just like a background colour in a lightish blue. It's got a little bit of green in it, not straight blue. And some red gold. And I'll just work back into that puddle of paint. And there I have my tree done. Okay. So I can continue working on that a little more. I can work into that puddle of paint with stronger colour if I want to. And I might bring a little touch of red into it. I'm always guided by the way the painting's going for the colours. You know, I don't necessarily run true to what's in front of me. Okay, so that's basically almost completed now. I might just come in and do a few little minor details. Could bring in a bit more green. Okay. Onto the dry paper. Look, I might just put a few more trees in the background. See how easily you can work over dry paper when if I was trying to work over the wet background, it would just go all over the place and you wouldn't see those tree trunks, they'd be just gone into the background. Okay, so this is a little different to what I did in class the other day, but each painting will be different. That's what I love about painting. So there you go. There's the scene. Thank you.